Well, hello again, Ricecast family, and welcome back to another episode of the Ricecast with Dr. Pastor, Sweater Vest Connoisseur, Willie Rice.
Yep, I'm in the sweater vest today, which, it's time of year, kind of, in between
rock
time.
The sweater vest.
Yeah,
though.
the old guys do. So put me in the category of the...
Some people, the sweater vest wears them. You wear the sweater vest.
Well, I'm glad to know it. But we're all basking in the afterglow, aren't we?
What happened, Pastor?
Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl happened.
Super Bowl happened. This is the first day I haven't had Bucks attire on. I've been wearing it all week.
Same here.
And, of course, wore it Sunday to preach in, which
you did.
I feel like that may have had something to do with it.
It didn't hurt. It obviously didn't hurt. We can say that officially.
It didn't, I don't know if I can claim any credit, but why not,
Why not? You did a lot of people may have saw this on social media too. You did a chapel.
Earlier in the year, the week of the Raiders game, they were in Vegas. I didn't get to go to Vegas. I had to do it by Zoom, but
right.
We have a guy in our church, maybe we'll get him on the podcast or sometime, who's actually works in the organization and has been really instrumental as a kind of a chaplain this year and a former player. So that we can really be proud. I mean, he's been discipling guys, preaching the gospel, and he invited me to come to a chapel for one of the weeks. So I don't know if it had any impact,
right.
But I'm glad to do it.
But here's what we can say: the team gelled. Later in the season, there's certainly a number of things that probably added to that. We can't rule out a stirring devotion that was given by him.
We're out. And we had, I know, and his name is Duke. Duke's a friend, some of you know him. He had also grown up under, spent some time with Tony Evans, in Tony Evans' church in Dallas. Tony was a real mentor of his. And I saw that Tony had come in to do the Super Bowl devotional, which I think was fantastic. Nobody better than Tony Evans. And so that's pretty cool that our guys are hearing from guys like Tony Evans. And, it's a reminder we enjoy this, but we have people in our area that are in these organizations, and they're serving. I mean, they're competitive. They're football guys, or baseball guys, or whatever the sport is.
Yeah.
But they're gospel men, and they're Jesus men. So they're serving the Lord in those ways also.
It was a great Sunday. I proudly was telling friends and family and anyone that would listen, I'm just so happy the Bucs delivered two of the most boring Super Bowls of all time.
Yeah, both Super Bowls we've been in were blowouts.
We blew them out.
I'm nervous to the end, though. I'm a nervous guy. When I'm watching football, like a friend was texting me saying, "It's over, you guys have it," and I'm like, no, they could still score, get an onside kick.
Yeah,
because I've lived it. If you've ever had that happen, you're just. You're always fearful. But anyway, no, they really did put the hammer to Kansas City pretty good, and that was nice.
If you're a Bucs fan and you just say Peyton Manning on Monday night, you know how quickly things can fall apart.
It really can. In any sport, I suppose. But football, the momentum really does seem to be a factor. It can turn on you. But
did you have a favorite play? Did you have a highlight that will stick with you for this Super Bowl LV Buccaneers team?
That's a good thing. That touchdown pass to Gronk, I think it was the second touchdown they got, where it was kind of in the back of the end zone, and he turned, and Brady made a good throw. I don't remember how long the throw was, but still just showed his athleticism to put. And Patrick Mahomes, by the way, is fantastic.
Unreal.
He really is unreal. But our guy's pretty good too. And with that second touchdown to Gronk was. I thought really exciting, and also that play where Kansas City was 4th and 9, and it was kind of like if we could stop them here, then we pretty much have it.
Yeah.
And they're down there on about our 20 or so, and 4th and 9, and Mahomes goes back, and our guys just come through like a fire drill. I mean, they just came bursting at him, and he's running for his life.
Yeah.
Running. And then made this incredible throw as he's diving, which fortunately was still incomplete. But I just thought, and of course his athleticism was on display there, but our guys were just, and by the way, Tampa didn't blitz that many times. We're talking football here. We didn't have to blitz a lot.
Right.
Our front four dominated. on the line, and that's when you can dominate up front,
Yep.
you're going to win football games.
Yep. It was so great. It was so fun to watch. I had a lot of people like, "Oh, it was a boring Super Bowl," and I said, "Not for everyone. It wasn't. I was losing it at my house.
Maybe for you, but for us, it was a lot of fun.
For you, it was boring.
Yeah.
Did you have what's your snack? What's your Super Bowl snack you had on hand?
Well, we've been trying to eat healthy, but I had not had pizza in a long time.
Come on.
A long time. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, 2 weeks or something.
That is too long.
No, a longer time. It'd been like 2 months or something. Too long. And so I finally said, Cheryl, I'm getting a pizza. We're getting a pizza tonight. I don't care.
Pizza. One time Rach asked me, we had pizza for lunch. She said I was going to make pizza for dinner. Is that an issue? And I said, that's not an issue for me.
I really
3 meals a day. Pizza's good. Any commercials jump out at you? Did you have any? I didn't ask this before. I didn't give you time to prep.
Yeah, there was one that I thought was really good about I thought the center of the country. They showed but I forget what it was advertising, car or something. But it really was kind of a feel good commercial trying to bring the country together. Talked about finding the center, finding the common ground. I forget who was selling what, so maybe it wasn't a very good commercial. But it was, but in the moment it was a good narrative. I thought it was really good. Seems like they were selling a car or something.
I think you're right. I can picture the commercial, but I also can't remember what they were selling.
I don't think the commercial. I'll give a take here, a hot take. I don't think the commercials are as good as they used to be. There was a day when the Super Bowl commercials were just must-see television.
Right.
Frankly, I was not impressed by most of them.
I couldn't agree more with that hot take. It seems it's gotten a little too formulaic for me.
And I'll give you another hot take. I don't care one whit about the Super Bowl halftime show. Can I just be honest? And that's not a knock on the gentleman who did it. I must confess, I never knew there was such an artist known as The Weeknd. Until this weekend.
There you go.
But that's just me being an old guy out of touch. But I don't care. They make a big deal about the Super Bowl halftime show.
You're saying any halftime show, though.
No, I like a college. Let the band get on there, march around.
Yeah, you're right.
Play some music. That's a good halftime. I don't like all these big shows, and they make a big deal. No.
Right.
It's football. Put a band out there. I'd rather see a high school band marching out there.
That would be fun.
I don't need to see all this nonsense.
This is the campaign.
If I wanted that, I'd go to Vegas to see a show. I don't need to see that.
You know, my friend actually said something very similar to me. This is a great take because he said it's not because the performers got to put a stage together and everything within 5 minutes. So it's not a full-on show. Yeah. I was wondering, a lot of players seem to be slipping in the second half. And I was wondering if there was some sort of connection between those two things. Because there was several plays where, I don't know, one time a buck fell, and then the Chiefs guy caught it, and thank goodness he then slipped. Because nobody, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one on that.
It could be onto something.
But I feel like there was some slipping around. Tampa Bay is where we're coming to you from today. The Stanley Cup, the reigning Stanley Cup and Super Bowl champion and American League winning.
We kind of get a half of one there, don't we?
The Rays... a little bit of the black sheep of the family.
They only won the league. They didn't win the whole
thing. And then a lot of people have been correcting me about the Rowdies. The Rowdies also did very well last
I understand.
year.
Yeah, I didn't follow that closely, but I understand they did.
Nor did I. But they were the East champions of their league. They didn't actually finish it. But go Rowdies for the Rowdies fans out there. Had our Ricecast listener Vivian texting or emailing me. She emailed me that to celebrate the win. So thank you to the Ricecast family that has become Bucks fans because of the show.
Brought a lot along, yeah.
We're celebrating with everybody today.
That's right.
Yeah, I was very proud of the jersey. It was a great jersey Sunday morning.
There's a boat parade going on this week.
There's a boat parade. I think it's today.
It may be, but I don't have a boat out there, so here we are working.
I think it's today. No one took me up on my Super Bowl ticket.
I kept thinking maybe somebody was going to walk up, at some point on Sunday, pastor, but it didn't happen.
Oh, it was a fun weekend. It was a fun weekend here in Tampa. We won the Super Bowl. We also started a brand new sermon series. We're calling One. It's about unity. why unity matters. It's great. It's coming from John 17. We'll put the link in the podcast description if you missed it. It's also the last episode of the podcast prior to this one if you want to listen to it there. But it was a great series. You want to say anything about the series?
I'm excited about it. We've just been coming through a time of such, you see in the world such division, such rancor, such turmoil, and the church is supposed to be kind of different, an oasis in this desert where people who have great differences come together. And that sounds like a cliche, that a lot of people would talk about. But the reality is the Christian church has throughout history been in many ways the only place where you saw such a diversity united with one great cause.
Yeah.
The gospel transcends national boundaries, unlike other religions. And I could go into that at a great length and will in this second message a little bit. But Jesus prayed that we would be one. Unfortunately, you don't always see it, and it is it's to our shame, and it harms the testimony of the church. So we're just leaning into that prayer of Jesus and asking, what does it mean? How do we live it out in our lives?
And I'll just pause here for a second and remark on something, because I think you even touched on it. I know in our area, coming out of the year that 2020 was, the political season 2020 was, and we talk a lot about sports. We joke about sports. I understand not all of our listeners like sports. But I can tell you in our area, I think you mentioned this maybe to our staff, it just was kind of nice there for a couple weeks that we were just all putting our Bucks flags out, and at least there was a little bit of...
it's kind of fun. I mean, again, we get it. We love sports, but it's superficial to a degree.
Yeah.
But it is fun to watch people who are varied in their walks of life, and I've seen it in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
All excited about the same thing. And you can say, well, that's very superficial. It probably is. But it's a small taste. Like, it's just a taste of what we ought to experience in the church all the time. That the church should be this very diverse group of humanity that's brought together by this common relationship that we have in Jesus. It makes people from all these different backgrounds and all these different experiences and all these different walks of life, but it makes us one in Christ. There's something special about it, beautiful about it when you see it lived out.
Yes, and we're going to unpack a particular thing you mentioned this weekend, but it really it's like for that little bit of time, again, I will reiterate, superficial, we get it, but for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks there, if you, whatever you were doing in your day with your Publix, grocery store, gas station, if you're both wearing a Bucks shirt, it just felt like, go Bucks, right?
We're in
like
this together, yeah.
You have this thing. So it was a cool little moment we got to experience here in this community. I love that we're talking about this. But you mentioned something this weekend I wanted to unpack some more, and you were just going into it there, right? It would be one thing if our world was experiencing this time of division, and we just, all of our community, we knew our community was going to deal with these types of things, but our churches have been just as culpable. Sometimes we have augmented the problem. And you mentioned something that just it brought up a lot of names to me personally. You talked about people. Actually, I'm going to quote you because I love this. Okay. Been involved in a church fuss because it can be a variety of things.
Yep.
And that's going to, for some of you, that's going to be a very real. Yes, this was a moral thing that was a big issue. For some of you, it's going to be there was just this thing that sprung up. I'll go as far as to say I got an email just this week from someone who's kind of in the midst of that, trying to get some direction on how to walk through that. What it leads to, I guess, would be one of my first questions, and I think this is a common question that comes out of it. We're talking about unity. We're talking about the importance of church unity. We're always going to be on the side of stay united, stay plugged into the church. At what point should you start to ask if you maybe should consider leaving a church, or if you should consider if this is the church for you anymore?
That's a great question because what we're trying to emphasize is this importance of unity, and we, not to re-preach the message, but we talked about the fact that unity can sometimes be a misused word. It can be used for people who are just trying to manipulate people, right. Superficial unity. We talked about organizational unity. There's somebody just browbeating others and don't ask questions, don't say anything, don't whistle blow, That's not real unity. That's coercion, it's manipulation. Gospel unity is something very, very different. It's when our common commitment to Christ, our love of the gospel, makes us one. Now, that ought to be exhibited in our churches, which means, unity requires work. It does require work. But the question you've asked is, and maybe even the first question is there a time when you should leave a church?
Right.
And then what are those reasons, and how would you do it? Those are all things I think I would want to say. Mm-hmm. Yes, there is a time when there are legitimate reasons for people to leave a church. I'm not trying to say that, organizational, that unity means, that a person can never leave an organization, a church,
right,
one local church, and go to another. I do think there's something wrong when people are leaving all the time. I do think, when if you look and you're the person every 3 years that's leaving to find a better church, and 3 years you're leaving to find a better church, and 3 years you're leaving to find a better church, and you're always criticizing the one you left. Well, at some point you may want to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
It's so at some point you may be the problem there, and probably are. But there are times when people go, look, do I need to leave a church? If you ask me when are those times, I would say first, I would think about doctrine. If you are in a church where all of a sudden you become convinced that sound doctrine is not being taught, that is, the Bible is not being taught. I don't mean that you're hypercritical about the pastor, because every pastor is different. They have different styles, and you don't have to have the greatest pastor in the world, the greatest orator in the world. The question is, though, is the Bible being taught? Is Christian doctrine being accepted? If you find yourself in a position where fundamental Christian doctrines, like the authority of Scripture, like the nature of Jesus and his work for us on the cross, these fundamental, the very definition of the gospel, if that becomes watered down in your church, then it's probably time to be thinking about leaving that church and going to another church, because doctrine, the gospel. And again, I'm not talking about people who are hypercritical over secondary, tertiary issues, even though secondary issues can be very important.
Yeah.
There's always somebody who can nitpick over everything. But if the foundational, fundamental core convictions are being compromised, that's probably a time to say, you know what, I need to be in another church. And then secondly, I would say if there's some kind of moral corruption going on, that is, if you are in a position where you look at and you realize that leaders are acting in a corrupt and immoral fashion, whether it's morality or it has to do with money, you begin to see abusive tendencies. And you try maybe to say something about those, and you can't get anywhere. That may be a time when you go, okay, this is not a healthy place for me to be. And then I think thirdly, it might be the hardest one, if the church is just so far off mission, and you have tried to be the catalyst for sparking renewal or revival, but the people of the church, the leaders of the church, have no interest in pursuing the mission of the gospel. That is, they're not interested in reaching people. They're not interested in seeing people saved. They're not interested in discipling people. Then there may be time. Now, what I would hasten to say, Anthony, is all those things can be good reasons to leave, but it doesn't mean at the first sign of something in one of those areas, doctrine, character, or mission, that you leave. I would say to a person, what are you doing to correct the problems? How is there someone you can talk to? Let's do it in the right way. Let's not engage in rumor mongering. Let's not engage in tearing down people. Let's not open up a blog and write about things that we don't know to be true or start criticizing. There are people that do that. That is ungodly. That is, you can know if somebody opens up a blog, for instance. I heard about a story today. Somebody in a church opening up a blog just to spew their bitterness at a church leader, which, by the way, is one of the finest leaders I know. Well, that's just evil. Even if everything that person was saying was true, which is not true, there is a spiritual, biblical way to handle it and a non-spiritual, non-biblical way. So we're not talking about broadcasting it publicly, but there are ways that you can go to leaders and say, I have concerns. Here are my concerns. And if you feel like you are being shut down, ignored over a long period of time, at that point, then you might you might decide, hey, maybe I need to leave. But don't just leave at the first sign of trouble. That's what we're saying. Don't just leave the first sign of trouble. In any church, in any organization, there are going to be times you disagree with a decision. There are going to be times the pastor said something you didn't like. There are going to be times he zigged when you thought he should have zagged, And if you're just sitting out there going, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, then let me just tell you, you're never going to be happy anywhere.
Yeah.
Because there are going to be problems everywhere you go, and therefore there has to be something within you that learns to stay and work through issues. And having said that, yes, there is a time to leave, and some of those are the times I've mentioned. But I just want the disposition of us, of all of us, should be, how do I lean into this, not run away from it?
Right.
How do I lean into unity? How do I do the hard work of unity? How do I handle this problem constructively and biblically, not destructively and in a selfish and harmful manner?
I think it's a Jerry Seinfeld little bit I heard one time where he talks about a restaurant when the waiter comes over and says, how's the food? And everyone usually says, it's fine, it's good, thank you. And then he's like, the restaurant closes. I don't know, everyone said the food was good. Nobody ever said anything. And it's funny, but I do think about that, and I think of, names come to mind. I have friends that they'll just leave churches, and it's like, man, what if I'll pause here and say it too. You've been saying it, I'll say it too. There are people that have been victimized by churches and leadership, and there are very, very good reasons to remove yourself and get safe and do the things that you need to do. Now, there are other times where you start to see the beginnings of problems, or you start to feel, hey, this is being said in a way or is being handled in a way that I don't think is, and you might be the very voice that body needs to step in and say something.
Well, you often don't know what's going on. And again, all these qualifications are very important, because I've talked to people who have been in absolutely horrific situations.
Yeah.
I wish it weren't the case, but there are some churches that have absolutely unhealthy leadership cultures where even abuse, even sexual abuse or emotional abuse, and certainly there's a time to extricate yourself from that situation and be in a healthy place. But what we're trying to say is there's no perfect place. There are healthy places, but there's no perfect place. So if you're in a place that you feel like, hey, the doctrine is sound, the mission is sound, but maybe I'm seeing something over here, don't just run from it. Lean into it. There are constructive ways to do it. What are those ways? Well, there are people in leadership. In our church, for instance, we have deacons. We have a number of congregational leaders known as deacons. And we just recognized them a few weeks ago. And I always tell our deacons every year, your number one purpose is to help protect the unity of our church. And then we unpack that a little bit. And I say, there are always going to be problems.
Yeah.
When people come to you with problems, well, listen. Give them a listening ear. Doesn't mean you have to agree with their problems, and maybe you shouldn't agree with their observations. But listen to them. I want you to listen to them. And then if there are concerns that warrant you making sure we know as pastors, then by all means, I need you to come and say, hey, there's a concern about this, or there's a perception about that. And if you're in a culture where you can't make those kind of statements, you can't go to a leader and say, hey, I just have a concern, or I just have a question, then you're in an unhealthy culture. Now, what I would say to everyone is, when we love one another, we give one another the benefit of the doubt, don't we?
Yeah.
That is, you see something you're not quite sure it's right or wrong. Why don't you start by giving them the benefit of the doubt? Maybe there's more to this than I know. Maybe I don't understand the whole picture. So don't come in guns blazing, firing away. I'm the big reformer. Let's take somebody out. Let's start a blog.
Right.
No, come in as if I'm giving them the benefit of that. There's probably stuff here I don't know. So I've always loved it when people would come with this kind of attitude. Pastor, I just have a question, and please know I'm not trying to attack anyone, but this was said or done, and could you help me understand the context of this? There's probably something I don't know.
Right.
They kind of assume
the
best. And what a beautiful thing that is for me to say, well, thank you for that, and actually there are some things you don't know. And then I maybe share, and they say, thank you for that. And other times, you know what? They have brought very legitimate concerns.
Yeah.
But they did it in a humble and gracious way. And I would like to think that we have a kind of culture which the leaders would hear that and go, wow, that's a good point. We didn't know that. Let's go back and talk about that. So I just think if you're in a situation where you go, should I leave or should I try something? I would say, unless it's just a very, very toxic situation, I would say try something. At least talk to the leader.
Yeah.
There's this whole idea of ghosting now. I think it came out of the dating scene, which, fortunately I know little about, having been married for over 35, 36 years now. I had to run the numbers real fast in my head. I think we're working on 37. But out of the dating scene, I think it's where people would date, and then they went on a date or two, and then the person ghosted them.
Right.
It means they just disappear.
You just disappear.
Well, church pastors have known about that for years. We've been ghosted. Every pastor's been ghosted, and especially now.
Yeah. Now
in COVID, people have ghosted, and we don't even know it. We're not going to know it for another year.
Yeah.
We're going to go, hey, I noticed you haven't come back yet. Oh, it's because I left your church 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks. It happens. It can be very painful in some cases. Where you just finally hear, hey, they left churches. I've always appreciated the people, and not everyone knows me personally enough to send me the email or have a conversation with me, but there's usually a staff member, a deacon you do know, and I have several people who've come to me and said, hey, could I buy you coffee? Could I send you, or they've sent an email, or they've called me and say, listen, we just want you to know, we love you, this, that, and the other, but we're leaving for this reason. I always appreciated knowing it. Now, what's even better, though, is if before they decide to leave, they would come and sit down and say, hey, we just have a concern, a question. And because many times if you would give someone the opportunity, you would find that there's more going on than you know. There's more to what's happening than you realize. And if you just gave someone the benefit of the doubt and leaned in and had what might even feel like an awkward conversation, you would actually have a great impact in that church. So if somebody's listening to us and they're going, do I stay or do I go?
Yeah.
Okay, there are reasons to go. I've given you 3, doctrinal, moral, and missional.
Yep.
So if you decide, okay, I think maybe I need to go, don't just ghost them. That's what I would say. Don't ghost a church. Sit down with someone in leadership. If it can't be the pastor, find someone in leadership. Don't attack. Don't assume you know the whole story. So don't come in guns blazing. Sit down and say, here's my question. Here's my concern. I'm sure I don't understand everything, but I wanted to share it with someone in leadership because I didn't want to just pick up and leave.
Yeah.
I care about this church. I care. I'm invested here, and I wanted to share my thoughts. And I promise you, I'm not going to be out there causing division. I'm not going to be trying to create disharmony. I just am sitting down with someone in leadership to share my concern. Now, if you felt like continually you got shut down and went nowhere and the concern wasn't addressed, okay, then maybe there's a time to leave.
Yeah.
But don't just ghost people that you said you loved.
Right.
That's not what we should be doing. It's harder to have the hard conversation, but it's the right thing to have the hard conversation.
And I'll just add one thing to that, because you've talked about this on the podcast. There might be more going on than you know. There also might be less going on that you know. I think we talk about giving someone the benefit of the doubt. You might be able to share a perspective of how something is impacting you personally that the communicator didn't know prior to this. And I'll just tell the story briefly because you've told it on the podcast. You mentioned growing up in the South and your relationship with the Confederate flag. And until a black person in your life said, here's what that means to me. Yeah. And you were able to, your eyes get opened and you say, wow, I wouldn't have seen that otherwise. So I would encourage you, to lean into those moments because you might have a perspective. You might say, hey, here's where, and it doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be, I think where that gets out of hand is some people will say, he said that way because he knows it hurts me.
Well, it happens all the time in the culture. It's the cancel culture. You're waiting to pounce on someone and cancel. That's what you do if you don't love people and you have an enemy and you're trying to take them out. Well, we are to be in covenant with one another. We love one another. So, again, don't assume the worst.
Yeah.
Somebody may have said something that really hits you the wrong way. But you know what? Maybe it was out of ignorance. Maybe they didn't understand what that meant to you. They're saying something that means one thing to them. It means something different to you. The only way you clear these things up is to practice healthy communication, healthy relationship skills, which is why Jesus encouraged us. If we have a problem with somebody, go to them.
Yeah.
Go to them. Sit down with them. Don't let it fester. Everyone can connect a few dots in their mind and come up with a story that isn't true at all.
Right.
So, Dr. Charles Lowry used to say, assumption is the lowest form of knowledge. Assumption is the lowest form of knowledge. So when you assume you know the story, that's the lowest form of knowledge. You don't really know the story. You got to sit down and talk with somebody. You got to hear their perspective. And that's why I would just say, if you're in a situation where you're thinking, should I leave or should I stay? I would just don't leave on an assumption. Don't leave on a hunch.
Yeah.
Because wherever you go, you're going to run into people. You're going to have some of the same issues there. And if you don't learn how to sit down and go, hey, I need to have a hard conversation. Let me share my concern. And as you said, then you're never going to have more mature, lasting relationships.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, the beauty of relationships is the ones that last through the years.
That's right.
As the great Kenny Rogers sang in one of his last songs.
Here we go.
We always look for a Kenny Rogers quote. But I love the song he and Dolly recorded. Their last recorded song was "You Can't Make Old Friends." And I love that song. It's a great song.
Yeah.
You can't make old friends. We should make new friends all the time.
Yeah.
But you can't make old friends. You just can't. You can't go back and say, hey, we've known each other for 25 years unless you've known someone for 25 years. So you can't make old friends. So when you have relationships where you have equity and you've been together, that you can't trade that easily. Don't throw that away on a dime or on a hunch or an assumption. It's worth trying to rescue that friendship because you can't make old friends.
Yeah.
And so I would just say to people, don't leave quickly. I think that's where way too many American Christians are just prone to, because it's so easy to hop into another church, the cooler church, the hipper church,
right,
the new church in town, the new pastor, he has hair, we're going to, it's a very sore subject for me. He's cooler. Hey, listen, okay, you'll do that, but 10 years later, there'll be another new church. There'll be another new show. And if you're just running to the latest thing, you're never going to have the depth of relationships that should mark Christian unity. Yeah. You only do that when you work through things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. And I just feel like the perpetual nature of the cycle you're describing is, I think, what's so alarming, because if it's just constantly that anytime there's any sort of something I don't like, I go. And we've seen people join other churches. I know me personally, I've seen people, attempt to start a church because they're like, oh, I'll just start my own because then it'll all line up. Yeah. And you talked about that in your message this last
Unity
week.
by amputation is what Eugene Peterson calls it. Let's just get smaller. We'll get united. But I'm glad you mentioned that, not to interrupt. But when churches are started, churches can be started for many reasons. But ultimately, most churches are started either out of division or out of vision. And churches that are started out of division rarely go well.
Yeah.
Even if even if there were people who thought they were in the right, because they're just reacting against something.
Right.
We don't want to be that. Churches should be started out of vision. That is, what is God calling us to do? And we love to send people out of Calvary. I mean, we've tried to create a culture now where we're planting churches and we'll have gospel goodbyes where we send people, we rejoice as God calls people to start another church. That's a win. Yeah. That's a win. It's painful, but it's a win. It's a good thing. So we want that. Yeah. We want that. But when you just get mad and go, hey, I'm upset, I'm going to go over here, very seldom do those things go well. Yeah. Because even if they think so, they're usually reacting to something instead of running after a greater vision. So, so just beware of that.
Yeah, and I've got another thing I want to mention in this vein at the end. But I do want to talk about what you said with old friends. You think about that, and you think about, I don't want to undersell the amount of vulnerability that it takes to do that. I understand if you've been hurt or you've been wronged, there's to go to that person and allow for a space that you can. But I would encourage you to think about your best relationships. And oftentimes you've been through at least one moment like this where you've said, hey, this is where we've had a conflict and we resolved it. And maybe I voiced what hurt me and gave this person a space to do the right thing in that area. And then how much better is your relationship after that?
Some of the strongest relationships I have, the guys I trust the most. And again, when I really spend a lot of time with our deacons on this at Calvary and saying, look, I need you to lean in. You can't lean away. The most frustrating I ever get with the deacons when they just, and we've only had a few times where they'll just ghost. But the vast majority of our guys, we try to coach them. Lean in. You can't push away from the table. You're a leader here now. There's a problem. You got a problem. You can't just push away. You got to lean in. It's a sign of spiritual maturity. Personally, I think it's a sign of immaturity when a person cannot have a difficult conversation. But the deepest relationships I have, I could mention several of our men who, something will happen, a decision will get made, or, they hear something, and their response is, I think of a number of occasions. I wouldn't mention them because it might embarrass them, but they would call me and say, hey, I just heard this, man, can I talk? When can I talk? You got time this afternoon? And for them, it's like, I'll make time, right? Hey, I heard this. I'm concerned about that. When can I come by and chat with you about it? And they come in and say, hey, we heard this, this, and this, and here's my concern. But then at the same time, then they stop and listen and say, no, so Pastor, what's going on? I tell them, and they go, okay, I didn't know that, but here's this. And we listen, and I thank them. And they would all say, it's probably an awkward conversation, to have come down and say, Pastor, to ask a question or to say they were concerned about something, which is a nice way of saying they were upset about something. But they weren't emotional. Why? Because they dealt with it immediately. They didn't let it fester. They didn't let it grow. They came immediately. So the leaders I respect the most are the leaders who, when they have something that bothers them, they came immediately and had the conversation. That may have been a little awkward. But out of that, there's always resolution, almost always resolution when that happens. And you learn to trust one another.
Right.
Because there are guys, I'll just say this. There are men that I trust. I trust with my life. I trust with my checkbook, my family. Because you know what? I've been in those conversations with them. Right. I know if they had a concern, I don't have to guess what they're thinking. I don't have to wonder. I wonder if they're with me or not. Because if they had a problem, they'd come talk to me. They have. The guys I have less respect for, I'll just be gracious, are the guys who through the years didn't do that.
Yeah.
And you found out a year later, they were bothered about something a year and a half ago, but they never came to you. They came to others usually. They talked to others, but they never came to you. They never had that conversation. And then that little seed of a problem grew and grew and grew, and it became worse.
Right.
And I just always felt like, goodness, you're a leader. Grow up, man. You're a leader. You're supposed to be mature. If there's an issue, lean in. Don't lean out. Have the conversation. And you may not feel like, if you're a listener, you may say, well, I'm not in a leadership position. But you are to be a person of influence, and you are to grow to spiritual maturity. One of the marks of spiritual maturity, I believe, in your family, in friendships, and in church, is the ability to have difficult conversations without becoming angry or accusatory or overly offended. But you lean in, you talk about it, you deal with it, and then 90% of the time you fix it that way.
Yeah.
90, Now, again, I'm well aware there are people listening to us who could do all of those things, but in a very unhealthy and dysfunctional situation. They got the door slammed in their face.
Sure.
They got shut down, or it was such a toxic relationship they didn't even know where to go. I understand. There are some unusual cases like that. And so we're trying not to just throw a blanket over everybody.
Right. And I did want to kind of get to there here as we wrap up the conversation, because I think what we're talking about, I hope what you're hearing is that, unity within your church, this is what this series is about. Unity within the body of believers, the Big C church, is worth fighting for. It's worth having difficult conversations. It's worth all of these things, which we acknowledge there's a cost to, and it's worth it. That all that being said, you have every right to be able to be in a healthy environment, and there are people out there that the second we started talking about this, and the second you mentioned it in the sermon, I thought, I know of someone who was in a toxic, damaging environment that they were not being heard. In the worst of cases, they were being abused, and it would be silly for us to pretend that it doesn't go that far, because we know it does. It
sadly does. There are some just horrific cases in church culture.
So I guess as we get to this part, I would just ask, what would you say to someone who has experienced that in a church, an environment like that.
There's some of the saddest stories I've heard, and I've heard plenty in my years of pastoring of people who have come, and sometimes it's years before they can even talk about it.
Yeah.
And they'll talk about a situation, and again, abuse can be a lot of things. We can be talking about physical, sexual abuse. Sadly, in the last few years, we've seen that highlighted even in church context. I can think of a few things more horrific than for a child or a woman, usually it's a woman or a child, to be abused by somebody in a position of spiritual authority. It's just horrific. And I guess the first thing I would say is I'm so sorry. I'm just so sorry. Number two, I would just say how proud I am if you are one of those persons that's been able to speak up and stand up, how very proud I am, how brave that must be for you to do that. I think if I was saying to someone, and then I would say to the person who's maybe been through that, please understand though, that's not what church is. That's not what a pastor is. You are in a bad situation, and I'm so sorry you were. But don't let the devil beat you twice. Don't let the devil harm you twice, in the sense that, and by that, what I mean by that, I hope I'm not saying that in too cavalier a way, but what I mean by that is don't let him get you with a lie that all Christians are that way, all churches are that way, all pastors are that way. It's not true. So for you run into people, well, I was wounded by a church, it did this, that, and the other. Well, it breaks my heart to hear that. Yeah. But you know what? We still need each other. We still need to be in a community of saints, and every church isn't that way. So when someone goes, every church, maybe they got hurt in a mega church. Every mega church is that way. Or maybe they got hurt in a small church. Every small church is that way. Or that's not true. Some churches are. To those who might be listening, and you never know, who might be listening to a podcast like this, and you are in a situation where let's say abusive in some way. That is not right. It is not acceptable. I have seen people manipulated. Don't say anything. I once heard somebody that I know was told, don't say anything. It'll give Jesus a black eye. Well, that is just absolutely terrible thinking. It's wrong. First of all, Jesus is fine. He can defend himself. When leaders are misusing their position, you have every right, number one, to expose them. If it is an illegal behavior, and if it's abuse, it may very well be, to expose them and to extricate yourself, to leave that situation. Some cases it's been emotional abuse. I've talked to people who have grown up in very, I started to say legalistic churches, but there are other types of churches that can do this, who are very emotionally manipulative and exploitive, and they're harmed by that. And that may not be illegal, but it is certainly not godly. And so I would say in those situations, yes, you should leave that situation without any guilt. Yeah. You should, and I still think if you can, tell somebody on the way out. Yeah. If you can. I also am aware that in some abuse cases that even that is very hard to do. Very difficult. And we understand why it's hard to do. Yep. We encourage you to report anyone who needs to be reported. Any abusive situation should be reported. But I also understand why some people have for years not spoken up. Yeah. And we need to be patient with that and understand that. Absolutely. That whole idea of, well, if that had happened, they would have said something. If you ever talk to any victims, that's not necessarily true. There are reasons why people have been intimidated into silence. But I'm so glad you went there, because when we talk about unity, we are not talking about this dysfunctional, manipulative call to be silent and to be subject to any kind of abuse or harmful situation. That is not unity at all. That is demonic. It is wrong. And you should not, in the name of unity, subject yourself to that. Yeah. And of course, we are always here. If you are in that situation, you don't know where to go, you don't know who to talk to. We mentioned this before in a different conversation, the different context of, hey, maybe going to a church leader for those reasons. But what always amazes me about the bravery of these people, which I'm so glad you highlighted, is when one person steps up, you're often creating a space for other people to step up and express, and the healing that comes from that is unbelievable. If you are in that situation and there's any way we can help or support you, we would love to help however we can.
You can track us down on social media. You can email me, arusso@calvary.us. We would love to step into your situation in any way that we can to help, because we know that this is all too common within churches.
We have counselors we can recommend, and even if we're not the ones who can be the help, we can find the people who are the help. And I just want to say to you, the church is so much better than that. The devil has gotten involved in a lot of organizations, and that's shameful, it's harmful, it's destructive. But there is this idea of the church, beautiful, glorious, biblical, of people who are bound together by their faith in Jesus Christ, pursuing God together, on mission for God together. While there's no perfect church, there are healthy churches.
Yeah.
And we want you to find one, and we want you to be in one. And then, then do the hard work of unity in that church.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, we talk about this, and one thing I'm so quick to talk about is because we believe in this so much. It's such a driving force of our X150 vision. With these healthy churches, they can transform communities. Our community was transformed over 150 years ago, and continues the great work that's being done here today, due to a legacy of faithful church members who I'm sure had hard conversations when it was time to have them. And we're sitting here today recording a podcast because of all that work. And how much do we believe in that we want to plant 150 of these churches all over the world?
Hey, absolutely. This church has been through hard times.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've studied the history, and when I got here, we don't have time to go into this, but it had gone through a hard period. It had been a hard period. There had been some division and hard feelings, but. And some people had left before I got, there had been an era like that, but it had been a short season, but it had been a season. But so many people leaned in and kept fighting. So many people wouldn't give up, and that, God was able to work and then bring healing back and restore health to his church. So we want to see health restored to many churches, and we want to see many churches healthy.
Yeah. And so we're going to continue on in this series. We're going to continue on in the one series. 4 weeks we're going to be in this series?
Yeah, all the way through February.
Okay.
Right. Valentine's Day coming up. Valentine Day. My wife always says I say it wrong. It's like
Day.
Singular, right? It's singular.
Valentine.
Valentine's Day. And I always want to put an S on it.
No, it's an apostrophe S.
Valentine's
Day.
Yes, I whatever you're supposed to say, I say it wrong. And she reproves me for this. But don't forget Valentine's.
Do not forget.
Day.
I feel like I say this every time it comes around, but it's for somebody. This is a word for some husband out there.
We have rescued your hide right
Your
now.
wife said, don't bother getting me anything. We don't need that. Do not listen to that, husband.
Do not.
You go get her a card. You go get her chocolate, flowers. Do not listen to that. I don't need anything for Valentine's Day.
Don't listen. It's
I don't know who needed to hear that, but you're out there, and I hope you
know,
heard it.
and you know who you are.
It's this coming Sunday.
Some poor guy's like, I'm off the hook. I don't have to do anything.
Yeah,
no, you're not.
It's
buddy.
you, Bill. It's you, Bill. You're supposed to go get the stuff. It's not. You go get the stuff. Rather say you'd always rather hear the words all you shouldn't have. Then
most definitely.
Why did you not? It's a better place to be, Bill. Listen to my words. Valentine's Day, this Sunday. We'd love to see you out here. All of our campuses, 9 and 11, Clearwater, Eastlake, Seminole. You can always join us online. We know we have a ton of you joining us online. Love the online community. I'll be there chatting. Calvary.us/watch or YouTube or Facebook. You can join us there. On the podcast side, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. Please do. Leave us a review. Pastor, I didn't get to tell you this yet. You can also listen to the podcast on YouTube now.
Fantastic.
We have the video up. It's not video of us talking, but it's just some of you I know are at work and you like to just leave it open and listen to it. It's also a great way you can share it. So check that out. You can listen to it on there as well, if that's the way you want to listen to it. And we'll be back again next week with another episode.